Well, thank you for being here this evening. We're going to go over some patent strategies for entrepreneurs. One of the goals is to help you understand how you can use the patent process to protect your invention and some of the things that you can do on your own to reduce the cost or reduce the chances of you making an error in that process. As I mentioned, that one of the best ways to reduce your cost is to make your mistakes early, or if you're making a mistake, the earlier you find out, the better. So it's way cheaper to change something earlier rather than after you've invested a lot of time and money in either prototyping or in pursuing intellectual property work. Hopefully you'll learn some things here that will help you minimize your upfront investment and then also help you get the most out of the money that you do spend on your intellectual property. To start with just a little bit of background, I'm a patent agent. That's different than a patent attorney. The biggest difference is I do not have a law degree and I'm not licensed to practice law, but I do have advanced technical degrees that qualified me to sit for the USPTO patent bar exam, which I took and passed, and I am licensed to practice and handle all matters at the USPTO. One of the things that I couldn't do that you could expect a patent attorney to be able to help you with is establishing a licensing contract or other type of legal contracts. That's something on the law side rather than the intellectual property side. That quick overview on the quid pro quo of the U.S. patent system. The goal is that you share with the world, and the world benefits from your invention. And part of that is you disclose how to build and use it. Now you get the right to exclude others for a limited time, but that's your right, not something that the government or the USPTO does for you. You get 20 years from the filing date for utility patents, but you do not necessarily get the right to manufacture your invention. Most inventions, we'll touch on this in a second. If your invention is an improvement on an existing invention, it could be that the device that you've improved on is still covered by someone else's patent. So you may get in a situation where they can't use your patented improvement without your permission, but you also could not manufacture their device with your improvement either without their permission to manufacture. And that brings us to the characteristics of many successful inventions. The most successful inventions are not the huge breakthrough, something revolutionary that no one's ever imagined before. It's improvements on things that already exist. One of the funniest stories I read was the decades and decades and decades that ice hockey existed before someone invented the goalie's mask. So people played for decades getting smashed in the face with a puck before someone thought, hey, what if I put something over my face to keep it from, breaking my nose? Most great inventions or successful inventions are easy to understand. It's one of those characteristics where when someone shows you how it works or explains it to you, it seems obvious, and of course that works. And one of the things that pops in your head was, I could have come up with that. And the other side of that coin is, why didn't someone think of it sooner? Much like the hockey goalie mask. Patent prosecution, there's usually 3 participants in the process. The first is the invention expert. That's you, the entrepreneur, that you are the expert on your specific invention and your little segment of your domain. The patent practitioner, which would be me, or a patent attorney, is the person who's skilled in helping present your information to the USPTO in a format that they can process and understand that will meet all of their requirements for being able to review it and verify that your invention is worthy of a patent. And finally, the patent examiner, who is the one that you interface with, or your practitioner interfaces with, to present your patent. And the patent examiner is usually a domain expert in the specific field of your application. There are many different sections or art units at the USPTO, and then many examiners in each one. And they try to assign the examiner to the art unit and to the group that's most skilled in your invention area, just because it reduces the time for the search that the patent examiner has, and they'll do a search and they'll compare your invention to the prior art. I like to think of it as 3 legs of a stool. You need a good invention, you need good drafting and good prosecution on the patent, and you also need a good patent examiner. You actually, you do not want them to let something slide, because the worst thing that can happen is you end up with a weak patent that you don't find out about until later when the money's on the line. If you're wanting to get started on your own, the USPTO does have a pro se assistance program where they will help inventors walk through the patent process. You can snap the QR code there and get some information. They have information available, and they also have virtual seminars. Unfortunately, all of their in-person seminars have been canceled or postponed indefinitely, given our current issues with the pandemic. But the pro se assistance program is great, but one of the things is you've still only got 2 legs of that 3-legged stool. So what may happen is the examiner may want to limit your claims, and if you limit your claims enough, you can get a patent. But what it does is it makes your patent have a smaller and smaller coverage. So your patent may be only on, if you're talking about chairs, it may be only on chairs with 7 legs that only have 1 arm, that are only over 6 feet tall. So you have a patent, but you have very limited enforceability, where when you have a patent prosecutioner working with you, they have a chance to review the examiner's rejection and let you know, or work on your behalf to refute the rejection and explain why the examiner was either wrong in how they were viewing your invention in view of the prior art, or that they weren't understanding how your invention was not related to that specific piece of prior art. And that helps you get a stronger patent. Another thing that is of issue for all examiners, but can be, it does, all examiners, all inventors, you have to be very careful about what you say and when. Publicly, you don't want to, you want to talk about how great your new invention is, but what happens is inventions usually evolve over time. And what you want to be careful with is, if you've got a great invention now that you filed a patent for, or filed a provisional patent for, and you've got the next version working, you don't want to inadvertently in an interview or on a webcast say, oh, this is a huge improvement, and sorry, I lost my train of thought, that this is a huge improvement over my old one, and the old one doesn't work really well. You're disparaging the old invention, so that can adversely impact your patent prosecution if you have a patent pending, just because you've said the thing I filed a patent for doesn't actually meet the need or doesn't actually work. So that's why you want to be cautious when you're making public statements about your invention, and also when if you end up talking to the examiner during your patent prosecution, that it's easy for the inventor to get excited and want to explain how the invention evolved, but it's something you have to be cautious with. Oh, sorry, man, that mouse is sensitive. For good first steps to take, and these are the parts about minimizing your investment, is doing some market research. One of the things that you should do to make sure that you don't spend money in the wrong places is you want to make sure that your invention is worth filing the patent protection for. You can file a patent just because you would like to have a patent, or you think your idea is really cool and it's worthy of a patent. And if you're doing that, the patent prosecution is actually not that expensive, and you could probably use the pro se program and come out just fine. But the return on investment for intellectual property really comes when you're selling a product that you're making money on and you want to prevent others from being able to manufacture it. So the start of that process is investigating the market need. You want to find out who the manufacturers might be, or who the potential licensees might be who do the manufacturing. Because usually, as an entrepreneur and inventor, you don't want to get into manufacturing. There are so many pitfalls with involved with manufacturing and licensing and distribution and inventory and wholesalers and retailers that it's usually much better to let someone else handle that side of it. And another one, another part to consider is, where would your product sell? Is this something that would be on the shelves at Walmart or Target, or is this something that would be sold to people who are using it? You know, be sold directly to mechanics, or be sold to someone who's using it as a tool. And that will help target who you're wanting to look at for licensees. One of the best things that you can do as far as intellectual property investment is have a prior art search done early. Prior art searching is a bit of an art form. It can be very difficult to find relevant prior art if you are not familiar with the terminology that the USPTO uses to describe specific implements or specific embodiments of your invention. So you can struggle and not come close if you're not using the same terminology that they use. One of the best things that you can learn from a prior art is, if you are covered by, prior art search, if your invention is covered by an earlier invention, it gives you a chance to shift your focus and focus on some other novel component of your invention, either a novel application for a problem it solves, or a novel way that it's manufactured that differentiates it from the prior art. And it's the earlier you find out that you need to pivot, the cheaper it is going to be. Here is an example of the MIT Technology Office recommended timeline for patents. And if you'll notice, after conception, the first next milestone is a patentability search. And patentability, there's some things you can't patent. You can't patent just an idea. You can't patent a mathematical formula. There are several things that you can't patent. So you want to find out early if you can file a patent on it. But I think most importantly, you have a prior art search to see if you should invest your money. And this is one of the things that differentiates entrepreneurs from institutional or large corporate entities. MIT and large corporations, they'll actually file provisional applications, and they'll file patent applications for things that they're not necessarily certain that they're going to make money on, or that are going to turn out to be valuable, or that there's certain differentiates over the prior art. But by getting it in the system and in process, then if it turns out to be valuable later, they can act on it. Versus if you publicly disclose it and don't file a provisional patent, then 12 months later, that becomes prior art that prevents you or anyone else from filing a patent on it. Let's see, here's an example. Someone came to me. I was actually working with a machinist who was doing some other prototype work for me, and he showed me an invention that one of his clients came up with and had him build a patent. It's actually a wrench extension that lets you reach inside of a very tight engine compartment and turn a nut by using the extension and having the socket on one end of this one spoke and having the ratchet on the other end. So he reached out to me and asked me to do a prior art search. And I ended up not charging him for the prior art search because it didn't take me very long. And I found out that that was something that existed in the art, and he hadn't found it because he did not recognize that it was called an offset extension wrench, which would not have occurred to me, but through Google searching, I tracked one down. So he was out the $800 he spent on making a prototype, but he was not out the money that he would have spent having a provisional or non-provisional patent application drafted and filed and pursued, only to find the patent examiner issues the first rejection and says, you can already buy this. And again, the prior art searching, it's a skilled craft. There are people who do prior art searching just for prior art search, and that's part of their craft, is that they know exactly the keywords and the designators that the USPTO use when they are doing their search. And that's the first thing that the USPTO will do, is they will look at your the claims in your invention, and then they will know what segments to look in, and then they will look for the closest relevant prior art. Here's another example. Again, it's not new just because you've never heard of it or you do some searching and can't find it. When I was in graduate school in materials engineering at NC State, when the idea of wax being able to absorb heat when it reaches its melting point and then release heat when it cools off, I thought, wait, I can make a coffee cup that will cool hot coffee off and keep coffee from getting cold. It's great. I'm gonna be rich. And when I finally got a lot of patent searching done, I found a patent from 1954 for just that thing. You can see that is a coffee cup that's filled with wax for just the purpose I described. And when you look at the 1954 patent, even they had prior art that went back decades. So most things are not new under the sun. There's some version close or an initial concept of what you have done in most cases. So if you're not finding anything, that means you're probably not looking in the correct segment for your invention. And it turns out that the thermal mug that I thought I had invented, there's a local entrepreneur in North Carolina up in Wake Forest, Dean Verhoeven, who came up with the Tim Perfect mug, and he actually has intellectual property on his Tim Perfect mug, not for the concept, but for his implementation with the triple-walled container and how the container is manufactured and how the container is sealed. I have a Jovio Tim Perfect mug, and I love my mug, but it was actually kind of nice to not have to make it myself. Here's another program at the USPTO. In addition to the per se program, they have the STEPP program, which can actually teach you. And they have two different sets. There's one for patent agents and examiners, and there's also one for inventors. And what they do is they walk you through exactly how a patent examiner receives the patent application, how they do the prior art search, and then how they compare your claims against claims in other prior art. And the reason the USPTO does the training is it's in their best interest for your patent application to arrive in the best condition for them to examine it. So it helps you avoid problems in the way you're presenting things. It helps you avoid leaving out information. It makes sure that you include, everything that's relevant. So I recommend that if you're interested in pursuing your intellectual property on your own. Other steps that you can do to educate yourself: try to become fluent in the domain. There are always trade journals or trade magazines for almost any niche. Whether you're making something that involves semiconductors, microwaves, radios, cameras, food products, do some Google searching and see what's out there. By the same thing, like I found that extension wrench on Amazon. Search thoroughly through Amazon, eBay, Alibaba. I thought I had invented something else for charging little Lego robots. I designed and built a few prototypes, and I was thrilled with it. And when I finally got around to searching, I found out I could actually order one next day delivery on Amazon for $14. Google image searching has been very useful for me, just because it's harder for someone to misdescribe something they're looking at, and it's kind of like a breadcrumb trail. If you can describe something in your search terms that gets you close, anywhere close. If you scroll through the images, there may be 100 images, but if you find one that's close, you can search that image, and then Google will show you other images related to that. And if you go 2 or 3 levels deep, it's amazing how much you can improve your search results versus you can spend all afternoon trying to improve a straight text search and struggle to get and evaluate the results because you're scrolling through page after page of text versus being able to scroll through images and immediately dismiss things that aren't related. And you can also do your own prior art searching. Everyone has access to the USPTO PAIR system. We'll talk about that more in just a little bit, where you can look at not just issued patents, but you can also look at the prosecution history. And you do this using the public PAIR. The PAIR is the Patent Application Information Retrieval System. The USPTO has always been in the process of improving it, but you can look at issued patents and patent applications that have been published. So you can find things in their applications at 18 months are published. And so you can see published applications and the prosecution history. And here's what the system looks like. And it's kind of a catch-22. If you're searching for an application, you need to know the application number, the publication number, the patent number. It's good if you have a patent number for an issued patent and you want to look at the prosecution history. But if you're doing general searching, Google Patents is generally faster, and that will get you closer. And then when you're wanting to do a deep dive, then you can take the information from Google Patents, the patent number or the application number, come back to the PAIR system, and then start a deep dive. And once you do that, then you can look around in the codes. If you look over here under patent information, codes, rules, and manuals, that they apply category codes to the inventions. So if you can get into the category code that's correct for your invention, then the USPTO makes it easy to look at the most recent inventions filed in that category. So you can see what the newest and latest and greatest things are, and then that gives you a leg up on finding things that might be relevant to the history of your patent or the prior art for your patent. There are a few downsides to the patent system. If you do not get a patent, your invention was published 18 months after your patent application was filed, that you can request non-publication, and some companies do that. Google requests non-publication for all of their patent applications. So basically their opinion is, if we can't get a patent for it, we don't want to turn it loose to the world. The downside of non-publication is you have to say that you're not going to file for foreign application. So if you change your mind and want to file outside of the US, you have to rescind your request for non-publication. Another risk for the patent system is if you, as I mentioned earlier, if you get your claims narrowed so much that it carves out such a narrow niche, a competitor can build something that's only lacks one of your constraints on your claims, and then it doesn't fit all of your claims. So like I was talking about, a 7-legged stool with only the left-handed arms that's always 6 feet tall. Well, if your competitor built one that was 5 feet tall, then that's outside of your claims and you couldn't enforce the patent. And another one that inventors, oh, sorry, man, that mouse is sensitive. If you leave out some step, your patent may be invalidated later for lack of enablement. And that's something that inventors can struggle with, that it's really a sensitive spot when you put a lot of time and effort into developing something, and when you come up with the secret breakthrough and you want to patent it, you have to reveal enough information to enable someone else to use it. But that also means that there are some circumstances where you made a great breakthrough, and once you show someone a picture of it and they know how it works, and a competitor could use it really easily without you being able to prove it. Say if it's a manufacturing step, and the only way that you know someone else is doing it is they're selling something on the market so cheaply that you know they have to be using your manufacturing method, but it's really hard to prove what method someone is using inside of their plant. So there's some circumstances where you actually don't want to file a patent because the disclosure includes all of the value that a competitor might need to take advantage of it, and it might be difficult for you to prosecute and enforce the patent. If you don't want your application to be published, you can, as I mentioned, you can make a non-publication request. There's some hand waving you can do if you forget to do it at the time of filing. And in that case, your application wouldn't be published until the patent is granted. Again, it impacts your ability to file outside the US, but you can rescind that. But it does mean that you get to keep your secret if you don't get a patent. The requirements for getting a utility patent, these are pretty standard, that it can't be an abstract idea, The USPTO wants to see structure, wants to see how something is built or how the steps that something takes. It can't be just the idea of how to do something. It must be new or an improvement on an existing invention. It must be non-obvious. This has been a challenge area that we're seeing a lot more obviousness rejections. And the other thing is the specification. Again, that is, you can't keep anything secret. You have to reveal everything about how to use your invention. And there's also been some challenges of your invention has to be in your possession. So the application has to convince the examiner and the USPTO that you have everything needed to build your invention and use it as you describe in your specification. There have been big patents that got overturned because they actually got issued a claim that they could not construct at the time of filing. And I'll mention that more in just a little bit. We've been talking mostly about utility patents because those are patents on devices or functions that accomplish something. Utility patents compared to design patents. Well, the utility patents are more expensive. They're harder to draft, longer to enforce, but they're valid 20 years from the filing date, which means it may take 3 years or 5 years to enforce, or not enforce, to finish prosecuting your patent application and get a patent issued. So you've only got the 20 years, the 20 years that's left after that. The 20 years including that time. So if you spent 5 years prosecuting the application, then you've got 15 years of enforcement. But you can go back and enforce all the way to your filing date. So if someone has been infringing and manufacturing something that your patent that finally issues does cover, you can go back for enforcement back to the filing date. Design patents are cheaper to get. They can start at like half the cost of a utility patent. They're only valid for 14 years, but it's from the date the patent is granted. So it's basically, you don't have to worry about losing time for a prosecution process. And the time for processing design patents is faster. There are also no maintenance fees for a design patent as opposed to a utility patent. We'll touch on that in just a minute. And the design patents are only, there's always one claim in a design patent, and that's the ornamental design of something, whatever your thing is. It's what it looks like. Famously, the big patent battle between Apple and Samsung actually came down to not a utility patent, but a design patent on the look of the phone with the rounded corners, and could someone else confuse it for Apple's design patented product, and that's what the hundreds of millions of dollars came down to. That if you get a utility patent, it's not just issued and then you've got it for the remainder of the 20 years since your filing date. You actually have to periodically pay maintenance fees. I'm sorry, these are the filing fees. That some of the fees that come when you're filing the patent application, and they vary by size. Most people would qualify as a micro entity. That means that you filed less than 4 patent applications. Non-provisionals don't count. I mean, provisionals don't count. It's only non-provisionals. And you're also not under an obligation to license your invention to an entity with 500 or more employees. Once you've filed more than 4 patents, you slide over to the small entity fee. But you can see generally the small entity is half of a large entity, and the micro entity is half of that. Actually, these prices are out of date. I think the USPTO updated their price list on October 2nd, so I'll need to go back and update these. Let's see. And even after this is what I was talking about, after your patent is issued, you're still not free and clear. You still have to, I'm sorry, this is after filing your application, that some people think, okay, I've got my invention, we've drafted my patent application, we've got the drawings, we've got the claims, we filed it, we're all set. Well, almost always the patent examiner will issue a rejection on your first office action. And it's just because it's very difficult to draft your patent to go around every piece of prior art in your domain. And that's where the examiner is an expert. So they'll reject everything. It'll come back to your patent practitioner, and they'll have to respond to the office action and either narrow some of the claims to avoid what's covered by prior art, or they may have to explain something with the examiner to help the examiner understand why your invention is different from the prior art. And after they agree, the patent examiner and the patent practitioner agree on, what may be allowed and what may not be, the practitioner will, amend your application. If you still disagree on something with the examiner that they're wanting to reject that you really believe you should get, there are appeals, and then there are issue fees. So you're not free and clear once you've got the application filed. After your patent is issued, this is what I was talking about, the maintenance fees. That and here again, you can see where being a micro entity saves you a good deal of money, but you're still $3,000 over the course of a patent's life for enforcement. And if you don't pay the fees, your patent application, not your application, your patent will be declared abandoned, which means you can no longer enforce it. But that's also a special case that I'll touch on again here in just a few minutes. Sometimes you want to move at a different speed than the USPTO. For example, if you're already making sales, you're already generating revenue, you already know who's infringing on you, and you want to keep them from making money and more quickly get to the point where you can be establishing your brand. And it's also, the other occasion is, even if you're not selling product or making money on it, but if you know that you're wanting to talk to investors, or if you're wanting to pursue licensing opportunities. In both cases, the licensees and the venture capitalists, they like to see that you have patent protection, not so much for enforcing the patents, but because when you have a patent, that means that you have gone through the process. It has been reviewed by the USPTO. It has been scrutinized and found to be worthy of a patent. And that's different from a patent application. The thing you have to remember about patent applications, there's been no examination of them. It just means they've been filed. So if you go through and look through patent applications, you'll see some applications for things that are quite outlandish that never turned into patents. But an issued patent carries a lot more credibility with the venture capitalist anyway. The licensing people are generally receptive to working with you if you have just the patent application process. Sometimes you don't want to go quickly, and you want to drag your feet a little bit because you're waiting to see if your invention is going to get traction. Again, you spend money each time there's an office action, and each time amendments have to be made, and if you have to appeal an amendment. So sometimes the correct thing to do is to spend money more slowly, just by moving slowly, to let you figure out, are you going to be able to sell it and make money? Are you going to be able to find investors, or are you going to be able to find licensees? So in those cases, you can work with your patent agent and make sure that you're responding within the time limits from the USPTO, but you're responding at the end of the time limits. So you're slow walking to reduce your cash flow. Something that you can do to reduce your costs and to help when you're wanting to go fast is to have a plan for the prosecution that you've worked out with your patent practitioner in advance. So you have a plan for what you're going to do when you get the first office action. Some companies will take only what they get on the first office action, just because they want what the examiner felt was clear. So if the examiner allowed claims, they will take those claims and go. Part of that has to do with litigation. Claims that the examiner allowed straight up the first pass through, there's no prosecution history showing that those had to be narrowed, so they stand up a little stronger in court, as opposed to if there's something that you've had to narrow and narrow and narrow through amendments. If it goes to litigation, the offender who's infringing will try to claim that they're working closer and closer to those restrictions that maybe the patent examiner didn't make severe enough. It's good to have a plan of what you're willing to give on, because when you have a patent application, you'll start with your first broadest claim, which describes the minimum features that you have to have on your device, so it has the broadest interpretation, the broadest coverage. And then you'll add bells and whistles until you get to finally the Cadillac version at the end, which has all the bells and whistles. And what it means is the examiner, if you have enough bells and whistles on it, the examiner really should allow something, because it is so specific that there's no prior art that has exactly your combination of structure and features and bells and whistles. So you've got something that you can move forward with a patent while you work on trying to regain some of your breadth on things that the examiner may have rejected. Be ready to conduct an interview with the examiner. I'll touch on best practices. One of the last slides is some best practices to prosecution, but one of them is talking to the examiner, and this is usually the practitioner talking to the examiner. Again, it's very easy for an entrepreneur, an inventor, to inadvertently say something that can be either misconstrued or interpreted by the examiner in a very absolute legal fashion when that's not how the statement was intended. So it's always easier to go through the patent examiner. And as I mentioned, if you only get those weaker claims at the end, take them and run. Move that forward towards the prosecution. You can file, if you still can't argue and get those additional claims that you want in this application, you can file a continuing application and pursue those additional claims. This is actually a strategy that a lot of companies use, is they make sure that there are claims that they're not going to get, so that when they go through the process, they go ahead and file a continuation and they keep an application open. Because if you've got an application that's been open and pending back to the original filing date for 17 years, you can still go all the way back to your original filing date. So if there's some version or combination of features that you disclosed in your original filing that you documented in an enabling fashion, 17 years later, you can refile that application with the new claims as long as they were enabled in your original application. So that gives the companies time to let the market evolve and see which of their inventions becomes successful, and then make sure that they've got coverage for exactly the claims that they want to enforce in the market. And if you, this is another thing, the last thing is the saddest part of prosecution. If you've drafted your application, you've gone through the process, you've responded to the office actions, and still the patent examiner says, no, there's nothing here that's worthy of allowance. There are no claims that they'll allow, so there's no patent that's going to be issued. Will you file a request for a continued examination, which gets you another round of amendments and another round of examinations, or are you just going to call it quits and stop? So it's determination of how much money you want to spend going on down the road. So that's a good conversation to have early with your patent practitioner. And PTA, this is a little esoteric. It applies mostly in the pharmaceutical areas, things where there's a high revenue per day, that if the USPTO took too long to respond to something, they were supposed to respond to something in a minimum of 2 months, and they took longer than they should have, that you can extend the expiration date of your patent by however much the USPTO over delayed their responses. And you can see here, if it's $1 billion a year sale in pharmaceuticals, that can be millions of dollars per day. So pharmaceutical companies will have teams of lawyers, or patent examiners, patent agents, patent attorneys, dedicated to reviewing their patent applications to see if they can extend the life by days or weeks. And this is just an example of, at the USPTO, the solution to almost every problem that you will run into is file the appropriate form and pay the associated fee. So if you didn't respond in the amount of time that you were supposed to, then you can buy a 1 month extension, 2 month extension. And these are really nice. The 4th and 5th month are down there in bold because you're only allowed 6 months to respond to anything from the USPTO. And if you go outside of that 6 months, your application is considered abandoned. So you can't always get those extra months. But if you respond 2 months late, you can pay the fee and file the form and the fee when you do your response, and that's it. It's just all taken care of retroactively. A lot of questions come up about software patents. Software only became patentable in 1996. There are some issues now. There have been a lot of software patents. Application rejected. Right now, the business methods and software patents are one of the hardest areas to get. That the more and more applications are shifting to describe the structure and what the process is and the actual devices that are doing the communication and how they're modifying the packets. We're seeing the pendulum swing. When software first became patentable, there were a lot of poor quality patents issued because so many processes were being automated, and people would take a process that existed and then automate it with a computer. And if you're adding some point of novelty to it, then it's worthy of a patent. But so many times it was doing the same thing, but just doing it with a computer, and lots of those patents were issued. And there was a lot of backlash against that. So now we're seeing it more and more difficult to get software patents. So you want to work with someone who is skilled and experienced in software patents if you're wanting to pursue something in the software field. These are other things to help maintain your return on investment when you're developing your invention, that you don't want to inadvertently make an offer for sale. You can do surveys and ask, how much someone would be willing to pay for something, or would they be interested in purchasing something like that in the future, or if it had features. And you can even put prototypes in the hands of customers or clients and have them evaluate it and even test and use your device, as long as that is part of the testing process. And there's no confusion with it being offered for sale. And an offer for sale is also, if you're going to a trade show or handing out flyers that are just informational to talk about the product, if you put a price on it, or if you say call to order now, that's considered a public sale. You've got to be very careful with online articles now, that just because anything that's published on the internet is considered published. You have to be careful with public use. One of the things that the U.S. has that's pretty much unique in the U.S. in the patent world is the grace period. That if you publicly disclose or use your invention, the inventor still has 365 days to file for patent protection from that disclosure. And by using a provisional patent application, you could actually release information about your patent, share it with the world, wait 364 days, file a provisional patent application, and then you've got another 365 days to file your non-provisional. So you could disclose it, and that puts the flag in the ground that this is something that you've invented and you've shared. So someone can't go the day after and file a patent for the same thing. So you've in essence gotten 2 years worth of shielding because you've disclosed it before you actually have to file the full patent application. And provisional patents used to be considerably less expensive than non-provisionals because they were much more a flag in the ground, and you're going to come back and add more detail. But since the American Invents Act went into effect in 2013, the U.S. is a first to file rather than a first to invent. So before then, you could file your application whenever you wanted and document back to when your invention happened with lab notebooks and witnesses, and have your protection go back to your date of invention. But since 2013, it is a race to the patent office. The first person to file wins. So that's the reason there's a push to file provisional patents. But there's also more scrutiny, because if your provisional patent doesn't have enough information to enable someone to use your invention and describe it in sufficient detail, then it may be challenged as you didn't actually have the invention in your hands. It hadn't been perfected, or you just didn't describe enough. So you didn't meet the requirement for that quid pro quo of you didn't share enough information with the public to allow them to use the invention and the benefit of it. You didn't disclose enough to get the patent. Let's see, maintaining confidentiality. That it's harder than you think to maintain confidentiality when you're trying to discuss your project out in the world. Standard procedure, you want to use non-disclosures for most of the people that you're working with. The one exception is you do not need a non-disclosure when you're working with a patent attorney or patent agent, just because there's confidentiality that attaches. Just like patient-doctor confidentiality, you don't have to sign an agreement for your doctor to be bound to not share your information. The same thing with patent agents and patent attorneys. If there is an expectation of confidentiality, if someone invites you to their company to a private meeting to discuss your invention, and the notes of that meeting are not published or available otherwise to the public, then that is not necessarily considered a disclosure if there's an expectation of confidentiality. The downside of NDAs is just like a patent. It's only a license to sue someone. So if you do have an NDA and someone does share something, then you've got to involve lawyers and courts to pursue it. And it's hard to get a positive return on investment like that. So but it's also not an issue, because people who are doing work for inventors or people who are investing, venture capitalists, they would not be able to stay in business long if they were actually copying patent ideas or copying inventions and using them. So the number of times that happens is very low. Let's see, I mentioned provisional patent applications. A provisional patent application can be anything. That it can be, a packet of sales information that you're going to present at a trade show, or it can be your presentation that you're going to give at a trade show. Because whatever you share at that trade show or that seminar is considered a public disclosure as far as it's informing. So sometimes it will be just a stack of papers and, smack a cover sheet on it and you filed a provisional patent application. Nobody inspects the provisional patent applications. Okay, there are the two guys in the black suits with the black sunglasses inspect provisional patent applications. They look for things that might impact national security. But other than that, no one looks at the provisional patent applications. And if you don't file a non-provisional patent application and claim priority to the provisional, it just expires and no one ever sees it, never sees the light of day. Let's see, you've got 12 months to file a non-provisional after you filed a provisional. The provisional patent application, again, it can be anything. It can be a stack of documents. You don't have to have drawings. You should always have drawings. You don't have to have claims. You should always have at least a minimal omnibus, which means I claim everything I'm disclosing and all the features and all the benefits of it. If you intend to file outside of the U.S. with a PCT application, because they require that you have claims in your original filing. But the provisional patent applications give you a filing date, and they let you have some breathing room on being able to disclose things while you're working with people to build your prototype, or you're trying to do marketing. You're protected because you're already on file with your provisional. Characteristics of a good provisional: you want to disclose everything needed to make your application. You want to go very broad, that you want to include as many different versions. And one of the things that to ask yourself is, how could someone build something almost like this that's not as good as mine, but someone might spend money on it if it was cheap enough? just to give you the idea of the embodiments that you should include in your provisional. That one of the downsides of a provisional is that when it is used as a reference, there are probably things that you've disclosed that you aren't going to be able to get a patent on, and you may not learn that until you're getting closer to the filing date of your non-provisional. So what some people will do is segregate information into different provisional applications. The provisional applications are rather inexpensive. So they may file 2 or 3 patent applications as provisionals, 2 or 3 provisional applications, and then work with their patent practitioner when they're doing their non-provisional. And anything that they're not confident that can get issued as a patent with claims, then they just don't claim, priority to it. So that provisional goes abandoned and is never disclosed. So that gives you a way to hedge your bets. And if you have some super secret component of your process, you can put that in its own separate provisional and decide to include or not include it a year later. And because if you disclosed it in your one provisional application, you either include the whole provisional or none of it. So if you want that filing date, everything that you filed in the provisional will become publicly available once your application that references the provisional for priority is published, which is 18 months after filing. Oh, there we just, yeah, I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. I was talking about why you would file more than one provisional. Walmart has used this extensively, that when they were doing the self-driving shopping cart, every time they thought of a new feature, a new component, they filed another provisional application. So when you file your non-provisional, you can go back 365 days and claim priority to every provisional that you filed. So you get the filing date for each one of those features whenever it was filed. And that's another thing that's interesting about being able to look at the file prosecution history, because the patent that you have in your hand or that you see for a product that you may be competing with, when you see the claims in the patents, all of the claims don't necessarily go back to the first filing date of the patent, because there may be multiple provisionals, or there may have been new information added when the non-provisional was filed. So there could be claims that have the filing date of the non-provisional and claims that also have the filing date of the provisional. So you have to look at the prosecution history to know. Let's see, the provisional patent applications, like I just said, they're visible once the publication that references them is published. So unless there's a non-publication request, the application, the non-provisional application, will be published at 18 months. And at 18 months, it will show up in Public PAIR. And then you can look all the way back to the provisional filing. Something else that's nice in provisional applications is your drawings don't have to be formal drawings. Not that you use crayon and marker, but they don't have to meet the line width requirements of the USPTO and the shading requirements and the labeling requirements. As long as everything that you include in the drawing and you want to include is there, then you can include it and have it updated to meet their specifications when you file your non-provisional. But there's the URL for the Public PAIR. Again, it's interesting to find the closest invention that you can find for your invention, and then look at its history, and you can see what the examiners allowed, what they rejected. Here's the self-driving cart patent in the Public PAIR system. And here is inside the continuity data, which tells you how far the priority goes back. And you can see all of these provisional patent applications that Walmart claimed priority to when they filed their non-provisional on March 3rd of 2016. And you'll see that they claimed them all the way back until almost exactly 365 days. So it could be that they have filed older ones that they didn't get to claim priority to, but if they rolled those into all of their new filings, then they can still get the oldest filing date that included that disclosure that's inside 365 days. So it's a very flexible strategy when you're trying to predict what may be high value intellectual property. Let's see. Oh, and mention inventors, that you can see how many different people were involved in the invention of the self-driving cart. Let's see, you've got a good provisional patent application on file. What next? And again, usually the provisional applications are less expensive. They're a good first step because it lets you safely talk to investors, licensees, potential customers. You still want to continue your market research, build and test your prototypes, talk to whoever you want to talk to, because moving on past the provisional application, you really don't want to do unless there's going to be revenue generated. So this gives you 365 days to put the pedal to the metal, explore all of your avenues and the ways that you can generate revenue with it. And a licensee that's interested in it, they may be willing to foot the bill for the non-provisional application, or they may have internal staff to work on the internal application for you, and that they can negotiate paying for that in part of your license. But again, you want to follow the money and invest in the non-provisional application when you're confident that it's going to produce additional revenue. The vast majority of patents actually never make back the cost of drafting and prosecution. Here are a couple of success stories. A bunch of balloons. It was an individual inventor that that it sold like crazy. It was quickly infringed on, but he had a licensee who, I think it was Whammo, a licensee that came in and was able to handle the legal defense side of it and pursued all of the suits and countersuits and worked all the way through until I believe they got $13 million in the final suit. And another one is the Super Soaker, Lonnie Johnson, in the Inventors Hall of Fame. Engineer invented the Super Soaker. He did it. He did the invention himself. His employer didn't want it. It wasn't related to the engineering work that he did. So he started out pursuing it on his own, and then ended up having a licensee help with the prosecution there, and turned into a multi-million-dollar industry. There are cautionary tales. Theranos, that they got patents on their stuff, and it turns out it didn't actually work. That's something to remember, that a patent doesn't mean that something actually works. It means that it is structurally different enough from the USPTO perspective on the prior art that it meets the novelty requirement and it does something. It has to have some utility, but that doesn't mean that it does what the inventors claims it does. Boston University, they had some issues with the patent where they claimed something that they couldn't actually do at the time of filing that turned out to be the claim that was worth money that got tossed out. GoPro, they did their own prosecution and did great. They were rock stars for the longest time, but then they missed some filing dates and lost some intellectual property battles. Let's see. One application turns into several. As I mentioned, as long as you have an application pending, you filed a request for continuing application, or you filed a continuing examination, or you filed a continuation patent. As long as it's open, you can go back to the original filing, and you can't add new information, but you can add new claims as long as they were adequately disclosed in the original filing. So that's how you may see what looks like the exact same patent application in 7 different or 5 different issued patents. And it's because they all have priority back to the same original filing, but they have different claims. Yeah, and that's the thing. You can't add, when you're doing a continuation, you can't add new information. You can move things around, and you can go back and add new claims. So that's where the money is at when you're doing a long prosecution. This is an example that shows one issue with design patents. They can be great protection when you're wanting to protect the look and feel of something. This was a design patent for a basket, and a design patent is for an object of manufacture with this ornamental appearance. And someone took this pattern and manufactured a plastic chair with this pattern, and they sued them for infringing on their design patent. And the courts said, well, a design patent, you got a design patent for a basket with this pattern. A basket is not a chair. So if that's the case, you want to get multiple design patents, one for each article that you're wanting to cover, if your design is applicable to different applications. Let's see. I mentioned the filing fees earlier. If you miss filing your filing fees, your patent can go abandoned. But since the PCT treaty, I think it was 2012, that there is a footnote in there that if the patent fees were not paid inadvertently, if the patent was unintentionally abandoned, then you can actually petition and pay the fees and revive a patent. So in the past, you could look at a patent and see, oh, wait, this patent has expired. And when you look at it in the system, it'll say expired fee related. It means they didn't pay the fees. That means you could safely go ahead and use that patented information or that patented invention in whatever way you wanted to. But now, because you can revive a patent that was inadvertently abandoned anytime during its 20 years since its filing date, then you can't do that anymore. And the unintentional abandonment is actually rather common. The case is usually that you have a large company that either spins off a division and the patents go with the division, and the new owners aren't getting the proper notifications about the fees and aren't paying the fees, and they go inadvertently abandoned. Or a company has acquired a lot of patents when they're developing a startup, and then the startup folds and gets sold at the auction block. When the intellectual property transfers, again, the notifications don't always go to the correct party. So there's a good chance that there are patents that may be of interest that look like they're expired, but they could be revived. Oh, let's see here. Best practices. Yeah, this is about the last slide. The best practices for intellectual property for maximizing your return on investment is follow the money. Spend money to protect things that are going to be able to generate revenue. And if you time it correctly, you can pursue the process for evaluating the ability to generate revenue before you file the non-provisional with the larger upfront expenses. Once you start, scheduling an examiner interview as early as possible in the process can smooth things out and get you to issuance with the least number of office actions. Some people will be tempted to say, oh, there's this one reference that was really close to my invention, but I don't think that they'll find it. That is a disaster scenario, because if you don't include the reference, and if the patent examiner doesn't find the reference, that doesn't mean the reference doesn't exist. It means if your patent turns out to be valuable and you're generating revenue and you try to enforce your patent, if the person you're trying to enforce the patent on finds that reference, then your entire patent may be found to be invalid. And now you're out all of that money, and the infringer can manufacture to their heart's content. I mentioned never disparage your invention. Again, it's so easy to do when you're talking about marketing speak, when you're talking about version 1, version 2, version 3, that you always want to, it's perfectly fine to pitch the improvements in the next version, but you never want to say the first version of the prior version is insufficient for this reason, or it doesn't fix the thing or doesn't solve the problem. I mentioned Boston University. They claimed something that they couldn't actually do at the time of filing, and that's the measure, is at the time of filing. And that claim ended up being tossed out in its entirety because it was enabled later. They figured out how to do it, but everyone agrees that at the time of filing, they could not actually do the thing that they claimed, which was growing a crystalline structure for an LED on an amorphous underlayer. And the other thing is, you can get too broad a claim. That there was a lawsuit when I believe it was it was related to the Nintendo hand controllers, and one of the original patent claims was so broad that when it was challenged in court, it was actually found to be overly broad, and it covered an entire segment of devices rather than this specific device with these specific features. So it was tossed out. If you find if something like that happens, you can actually go back within 2 years of filing and go back into the patent and have the claims narrowed, but you can only do that within the first 2 years of issuance. Well, thank you for your time. There's the QR code if you want to pull these slides. They're on Google, and you can pull those up, and I will be happy to answer questions. I don't know how we would handle those.
I'll be glad to read them to you, Shane.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's go back to here. I think you've answered a few of the questions that one had asked early if you were going to be covering software, and you did. One person had commented, I think it's important to note that maintaining a patent requires regular fees without a product revenue that is out of product or pocket expense, which is expensive just for bragging rights.
Yes. Well, the thing is that if you get one just for bragging rights, you used to get the really nice plaque from the USPTO, and I believe they've stopped doing the really fancy prints, but there are places who will still, print it or print it in metal, and you can get it published and hang it on the wall. There's nothing that changes about you got that patent, and the only difference it makes whether the patent has been abandoned for fees or not is you've lost the ability to sue someone for infringement. So if you have no intention of ever suing someone for infringement, then you really don't need a patent. But if you do want a patent just to have the patent, then you've gotten it. It still hangs on your wall. When you walk by and someone has a wall full of patents. I mean, the only way that you know one is valid is if you look it up. So I wouldn't recommend paying the maintenance fees if you're just wanting it for a trophy for your wall.
Okay. Next question. Does one need to file a U.S. patent and a global patent at the same time? Does the U.S. patent give you exclusive rights globally, or does an inventor need to file patents in every country separately?
That you can't file a U.S. patent and get protection everywhere, but what you can do is file with an application that's going to become a PCT, a Patent Cooperation Treaty patent. And when you file in the U.S., you can designate the U.S. as the originating country, and then you can file basically the same application in other countries. And typically what you would do is you would pick the markets that you want to pursue. Like sometimes people will only file for patents in the U.S., China, Germany. They may include Italy, but you'll do it by market just because it's still not cost effective to file patents in countries where you don't expect to need to enforce them. That's one of the reasons that Germany is popular for manufacturing lots of devices. Korea, lots of technical patents are filed in Korea. That a lot of components. Samsung is there making all the flash and RAM components. So the two places that you want to file are places where someone would buy it. You never want to make the consumer, the person purchasing it, you don't want to make them the infringer. But what you do want to do is when you file in the US, if your thing is manufactured in Korea, well, if you have patent protection in the US, you can prevent something that's manufactured in Korea from being able to come into the US. But by the same token, if the thing is manufactured in Korea and it's shipping to Italy or Canada or Portugal, if you have patent protection in Korea, you can prevent the manufacture of it in Korea. So that's basically where you want to protect it, is places that you can limit others from either manufacturing it or selling it.
Okay. Next question. How do public research papers affect patents?
I don't know that they do. If something is disclosed in a public research paper, it's a public disclosure. That means the only person who could file for intellectual property on it is the author of the technical paper or the team of whoever created the content in the technical paper. But lots of times depending on the journal and who the contributor is, that some have standard practices that they will always file a provisional patent, even if it's just the article itself. So that buys them a full year to see if there's any traction or interest in that item before they decide that they want to shift from, they may be able to get a provisional patent filed if it's just that disclosure. They may be able to get it filed for just a few $1,000s versus, when they go to file the full-blown patent, you're looking at somewhere, between $7,000 and $20,000. And
okay. And let's see, someone had asked about information on your prior art search seminar. I believe you have, is that what's on, you're referring to what's on your website, or are you
I don't have that up yet. That is something that that was planned. I've got the registration list set, and you can hit the QR code there to sign up to be notified for that. But that was scheduled pre-COVID, and still trying to figure out how and when to hold that. Of course, it's going to be remote, so I've just got to set it up as a remote class.
Okay, and I believe about the last one on here. Let's see, can you have a license with just a patent application? Licensee with just a patent application?
Certainly you can. And actually, let me see if I can. Let me try something here. I'm going to stop sharing this screen and start sharing a different screen. Okay. Give me just a second. Stop sharing. And then I'm going to share the other screen, because that's a great question. And so do you see the, since I can't see what's on my screen, do you see the book there, Become a Professional Inventor?
Yes, it's showing up.
Okay. Stephen Key is, he's the author. He's got several books out there. I've read everything that he's written. It's entertaining, it's informative. His big mantra is you don't have to have a patent to do licensing, that you can do licensing with just a provisional patent. You can also do licensing even if you don't have a provisional patent. He recommends that you do have at least a provisional, but he also has information about filing your own provisional. But this is his latest, I believe this is his latest book. No, he came out with one, it's a little off topic from this, but I recommend it highly. And he also has a service called InventRight. Oh, I've got the graphics, oops, shoot. Got the graphics covering the URL, but it's inventright.com, where he's got lots of articles there that he's sharing information about his experiences interacting with licensees and finding licensees and marketing. So if you're interested in licensing your invention, I would say first thing, go buy his book, Become a Professional Inventor. He shares lots of lessons. And then go check out his InventRight website. That I enjoy looking at the videos that he shares. He's always sharing with success stories of his people that have worked with him through the InventRight, who've successfully licensed their invention. So it's very inspiring to see someone else who was able to make it happen. And it's useful information. It is a great place to start if you're interested in licensing.
Okay, and last question. One had asked about the, let's see, it fell off my screen here. Best practices for the PCT, I believe that's the Patent Cooperation Treaty.
Yes. I would say best practice for PCT is talk to a patent practitioner. That just like you can file in the U.S. and take an application to another country, you can also file outside of the U.S. and bring something in. It doesn't impact our audience here, but generally the regulations are you have 30 months from your original application to complete your application in the foreign country, and that means that you have to pay within 30 months you have to pay your filing fee, the inventor's oath saying, yep, I really invented this. I've disclosed everything that I think is relevant prior art. And the translation. If the company where the country where you're wanting to file your PCT is English is not their accepted language, then you have to also have the translation. As long as you do those three things within 30 months, then you have your application filed. But again, if you're going to do PCT, I would talk to an experienced patent practitioner. But the European patent offices have a little different structure on how claims are handled. So the U.S. is a little broader structure, a little more flexible. So you can write with European style claims in the U.S., but if you've got them structured in a way that's unacceptable to the European countries, then it can be more challenging. The other thing to be careful with PCT is the PCT lets you claim priority when you file a first application and a second application. So you have to be very careful if you think you're interested in filing multiple provisionals, or you're going to have multiple stages of development or disclosure, and talk to someone who's experienced in PCT to make sure that you don't inadvertently create a stumbling block, because there are things that are perfectly acceptable in the U.S. that can cause a hitch in foreign applications. And if you have any more questions, my email address is there in the lower corner, and I'm happy to answer.
Okay. We will be cutting this off now. I will forward, I believe there might have been a couple of unanswered questions back up in the queue, but I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. Again, this was a presentation of IEEE USA of our, the AICNCC, or the Alliance of Independent Consultants Networks. This video will be available, and again, the slides were available from Shane. Hopefully you captured that QR code. If you did not, contact us and we will get those to you. Again, many thanks to Shane for doing this presentation tonight. And again, thanks to IEEE USA for sponsoring this, and also to all of you for attending. And we look forward to seeing you at our next presentation. So with that, I will wish everyone a good night, and take care.
Thank you, Charles. We appreciate it.